SOD is so you're not the noisy neighbor in the production environment. If you're going to break something, you break it there. So you get your own tenant, the key to it. And you could have as many user plans and different user plans as you want. If it's standard up, then we do not add expander services by default. If you're registered customer, we add it for you. Just so you know the difference. And you get it by registering as a developer. It's the small form, just fill it out, and it creates a ticket for me, and I ask one of the Q&A to create it in SOD. There's no problem if you actually want many. This is now changing, so you will find it under developer and apps and partners. And is Miriam here? Yeah. So Miriam is doing a great job just revitalizing what we have said we will do for many, many, many years actually. Making it easier to find information and where to start. It also means if you have bookmarked some of the forms we use, they will break now. So find all the information and also easy access to what the customer wants to standard up. In SOD, new releases are actually pushed out every night. This means that you could have a tenant that it auto upgrades with the dangers of actually getting things in this version that doesn't work every night, but it also means you will follow what happens. If you don't have to upgrade on your tenant there, it will be a wave upgraded when we are going close to publishing it into production, which is every 3 weeks. Then sometimes we forget this manual work, so if you notice you have an old one, just let us know and we will fix it. It's possible to have as many tenants as you want in this environment. The reason is that when I get apps into certification, I often find that when I try to provision it, it breaks because they have been running it on their tenant for a long time and everything works on my machine. So ask for a new one. It saves us both time. Because if it breaks when I try it, I will just send it back to you. And you have an extra loop. Okay. So automatically upgrade is just a tick box we set on the customer tenant. So what is an app? It could be adding features or marketing apps or just having access to the database or have some technical capabilities and operational behavior. It all depends. When we talk about an app, however, it is what we register in SOD. And this means you fill out the form we have on the community. If you're not sure what to fill in the different fields, just fill in what you know, and we will help you. All these fields here actually map into what we can set in our operations center. So is this a Windows or phone or is this made for web? Add a description just so we know what you're thinking. Endpoints, which endpoint do you want? As Tony showed yesterday, we have all endpoints available. With GDPR, you need at least 8.4 or higher. 8.5 requires a different .NET framework. And then redirect URL, which may not be as important anymore.
For phone and Windows applications, not necessarily if you follow, I highly recommend using the native app workflow.
And then if you need some whitelisted URLs, of course, URLs, you also need to tell it. So we put it on the app. If it's not in our environment, you will be denied access. User context. Will this run as a user or will you have system user access? And then there are some integration URLs, like if you want the database mirroring, which will copy of a subset of the database tables into your location, so you have direct access to the database. If you're running quote or sync. These are URLs that must be publicly available, and as you probably may have noticed, we have some limitation on which port numbers. So you will find it at the Register Your app.
Can we go back to that one slide for a minute, right here? I think the biggest takeaway from this is to understand that a single application has multiple possibilities or capabilities that can be associated with it. What's common that we've seen when people register applications, they start to get developed, and of course they're just trying to get their head around this. They're trying to build an application, and then they start off, and then they finally get past the authentication hurdle in their mind, and then they start to build their functionalities and provisioning, so they're automatically creating web panels so that when they mock up an installation, they get some web panels, maybe some buttons, and then they get some functionality inside SuperOffice. Once they get to that point, they're like, oh, you know what, this other requirement that I have for my app, or whether it's a standard app or a custom app, usually this is most often the case with custom apps, custom integrations, what Cathrine often refers to as one-offs. They'll come off and say, oh, I need actually the quote functionality, so I'm going to build a quote connector. So let me go ahead and register another application so that I have that quote capability. Then they'll come up and, yeah, okay, we want to do synchronization also with this customer's other ERP system, so let's go ahead and set up another app for ERP synchronization, stuff like that. And that's a common misunderstanding. You don't need to create separate applications for all of those capabilities. A single application supports all of those things. So a single application could have access to multiple different web service endpoint versions. You specify a version, and that version will remain for the lifetime of your application.
Unless you ask it to change it.
Unless you ask it to change it. Every single time, when Margrethe was talking about on a nightly basis, when they upgrade the file sets, basically is what we call them internally, and the new refreshed version of the application doesn't affect your services. That service version is going to stay the same. So in addition to that, webhooks. Your application can have webhooks. It can have quote. It can have ERP. It can have database mirroring. It can have multiple different things going on simultaneously. You don't need 3 different apps for each capability. You have one app for that whole standard functionality. That's, I think, basically what we want to convey here. So what we want to show you is really, you can think about this as sort of a preview of what you can expect to find when we finally make a public partner portal available for you to manage your applications. So Margrethe is going to take you through step by step. When you send her submit that form for a new application, this is exactly what happens behind the scenes. So
what I will do is enable the app, which makes it possible for you to actually authorize it. It also needs a name, so today I will make the Expand World 2018 really fancy app.
Some of you guys are aware that these applications earlier on, they can be deployed as beta applications, right? There was a stipulation that said you had to have so many customers that have this application installed before we make it available.
We still do.
What's the key word there?
Either 3 customers running for 30 days without any incidents, or 1 customer running for at least 60 days without any incidents.
And in that case, if you're in a beta period, then we'll have the is beta checkbox checked to be able to even begin to mock up the installation of your application. It has to be enabled. And after you get certified by Watchcom, then we'll check the checkbox for is certified by SuperOffice.
No, security audit actually.
Security audit. Not certified by Watchcom, but security audit.
And an app may actually be available in OC without being published to the App Store, so you would have access to it with the app ID and everything, but you won't see it when you go to any environment /App Store. that's the tick box published to the App Store.
Just to sort of show you the, the simplicities of how things are showing up inside the App Store and what settings, how we set the settings behind the scenes in order to make those things happen.
And then the authorization information is when you get up the dialog saying this fancy app wants access to the database. It also have orange text. It's the authorization info. We add this will add web panels or make it access to ERP using some basic short information about what it will actually do. The other stuff here is more for the App Store. So I will just ignore it and go straight to security, which is what's important in the start of it.
Well, I don't know. I think some people are concerned about how their application appears in the App Store and how that sort of happens. So if we just take a glimpse at description. Right?
Description?
Right.
Nah.
This is where Cathrine comes in, because Cathrine is very concerned about how your app appears in the App Store.
So this is what I and Miriam and my colleagues also look at. We basically write. We take what you send us and then we enter it here and we massage it. So because this text, these boxes enter, we enter text and that is what appears in the front end of our App Store.
Let's go ahead and open up the App Store and take a quick look and so you can see how those properties map to the fields as they appear online.
And with all the fancy apps we have installed.
That's why for those of you who've gone through the process that we typically send you how it looks in the App Store in Sod App Store. So for example, this one we're planning to get out soon. You just scroll down. Then you see there's some links, there's some categories, there's some descriptions and pricing terms, and this is what we enter through the platform OC or SOD. If you go back to
Description.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Basically just enter text here. The view and the plan is to make this available for self-service, but at the moment it still has to go through us.
Okay. How to install?
You also have all the information that you will see on this page. Next.
Images and links? It's not complicated. We basically just want to show you that hopefully this is a preview of what you'll have available to you as an application vendor in a future partner portal as an online app partner. Right? But we're still working on the identity bits and the roles and the framework that this sits on top of in order to make that happen in a secure way. Now we get to the meat. Yes, this is the meat of our Operation Center, our OC, when we talk about OC. Go ahead.
Yeah. The app ID and app token is what I send you. I typically send it with send safely, and I specify that this information will be automatically deleted in 10 days, so make sure you keep it. If your app is using the system user app. System user
Token?
Yes. Then I will generate the public-private key for you. I will send you the private key in the send safely message that will automatically be deleted after 10 days. And if I now save it, it just saves the private part of the public-private key page. So if you lose this message and
what she means is it only saves the public part.
Yeah.
Oops.
Right.
So the application identifier. Who here is familiar with OAuth 2? Okay, so the application identifier is the equivalent of a client ID. inside OAuth. The application token is the same thing associated with a secret inside OAuth. The client ID and the client secret. So the sign-in keys come into play when you want to be able to validate the requests that are being sent to you from SuperOffice, whether or not you're using the quote or the ERP sync or the database mirroring. You have to do sort of a handshake. So you need to have the SuperOffice public key. That's why we have a big article, several, on installing these certificates, so that you can validate the request that we privately sign. We send it off the request to you signed, and then you use our public key to validate them using normal certificate validation routines. And then this, when we generate your application, we automatically create a public-private key for this application and make a secured download available for you to get access to this private key. But you don't have to use it. If you have a well-set procedure for generating certificates in your enterprise, you can generate them there and just send us the public key, and we'll put the public key in here, and that's all we need. That's all we care about, so that we can validate your requests that come in that are signed whenever you want to do this system user token exchange for a system user ticket. Yeah. So it's really pretty straightforward there. That's what we're doing there with the signing keys. Any questions about that? If not, if you have questions and you want to talk about the certificates and the signing of applications, go ahead and hit up with me later and we can walk through the whole thing in detail.
Then every app that's going into the App Store will have the approval required by administrator.
What does that mean?
It means that a SuperOffice user with general admin rights needs to click, I approve this app to have access to my database.
That's when you mock up an installation, right? So you find an application in the App Store, they click on install. If they're not already authenticated, they get redirected to the SuperID login page where they sign in, and then after that, the first thing they see is this consent page. The consent dialog basically says, do you as a customer want to allow this application access to your web services? And when you give consent and you say, I agree, then behind the scenes, there's an application authorization record that's created, and it's a contract between that tenant user and the application. We'll get to that in just a second.
Yeah.
If I want to stay on that the roles there for a minute, and there's explicit and administrator, and those are basically the two most important. The two sentences that we're going to use for custom apps and standard apps. Like Margrethe explained, all standard apps are going to be set up for administrator, and then applications like the Visual Studio Code demonstration we did yesterday, and some of my apps have to have explicit set and set. And what that means is I have to pre-create the authorization record. It's not possible to mock up the installation of an application and I'll never get that consent dialog. It will always just fail because I already have to explicitly have that authorization record created. Let's go ahead and take a look at an authorization record. Any one of my apps.
Anyone?
Yeah.
Not the fancy app?
Definitely.
You don't like the fancy
Or
app?
fancy app, yeah, whichever one you got ready.
So fancy app is an app that we created for Expo World last year, I think, just to demo something, and it was authorized. And then we can see who has actually authorized this application and when it was done. So we store this information. This is why you should have the administrator, and you never ever ask for an administrator's username and password to do it for them.
That is
big no-no.
Big no-no. If we ever discover it, then your application will be revoked from the App Store, and whether it's a standard app or a custom app. You should never store user credentials, ever. The system user token and system user settings here, when you create this authorization, if you've checked the system user checkbox, then the first time you give consent and authenticate into the system, it will automatically generate a system user token, and this is where it's stored. It's associated with the application authorization record. And that way it's unique per application, per tenant. And then the application, the tenant, or the partner application will receive this as one of the claims that then can be stored in a database and associated with that tenant. And it acts like a system user. It's not a credential. You have to exchange it for a credential. So it's the equivalent of a refresh token in the OAuth world. This is not OAuth, but this is sort of the old association of it.
There are some changes that if you do it to an app, it requires the administrator to reapprove the app. One of these changes is that if you have been running it in the user context and you add the system user, then the customer's administrator needs to say that, okay, I would still allow this app to access. And until he does, the app won't be able to connect.
We scroll up just a little bit so we can take a look at the higher properties. When you specify like your redirect URL, coming down, that's the default redirect URL that's specified here. Normally we want this to be a post. Right? Always the redirects will post you, so that actually that's the only way that we can submit to you those claims in that request. And then the form arguments, we're really moving away from SAML. We really expect people to start using JWT exclusively because really that's what's used in OAuth mostly and OpenID Connect. When we talk about asking for additional redirect URLs, you can see a little bit further down underneath the CURs, there's the redirect URLs. When we talk about adding on URLs for a whitelist, this is it. So if you explicitly specify redirect URL in the query string when you send the user to log in, it has to be in this list in order for that post to be submitted. If you do not submit a URL in that request, we'll just send it to the default redirect URL with the form argument that is set here. Any questions about that? Okay.
Then there is the endpoints. We still have these old ones, but we do not add new apps now, which have the Services 73, which we are going to remove.
Services 73 is quite old. I think we're pushing on 8-9 years. So, and it is the way that we generate the service proxies. They are consolidated all into a single DLL, so they do get quite large. So we'd like to get rid of 73 because it's one of the most cumbersome ones that we have. It was very legacy. Prior to going to 8.0 or 7.5, there was a lot of restructuring of how the assemblies were constructed and deployed. With 8.0, we consolidated those all into single assembly and then push those out for our SuperOffice proxies. So we'd like everybody to work with 8.0 and higher, but we still do have some applications on 7.5. But we would like those to migrate over. If you're writing applications and you're using the service API, make sure that you don't use and you're using our proxies, do not use the version namespaces. All the data types that you want to use are inside system or superoffice.crm.services. Never go into like superoffice.crm.services86, or anything like that, because the way that the service proxies are created, all of the methods that you need are inside, or all of the data types with the methods for the service agents are inside superoffice.crm.services. I'm sorry I don't have a slide to show you that right now, but that's just what it is. So when you code against a specific version, you've compiled your application with a specific set of the proxies. You use those data types, and they're never going to change. So they're always the same between version 8.0 and 8.6. So you can recompile your application if you want to in order to take advantage of the newer methods and agents that come with Services 86. And your old methods will still work. There's going to be that backwards compatibility. If you start mucking around in the namespaces, that sort of thwarts or short circuits the way that the logic is built into the proxies to determine what endpoint this tenant requires or is set for, or what services this application is associated with. If you want to upgrade to use Services 85 and to take advantage of those newer agents that are out there and some newer methods, then you just go ahead and grab the latest assemblies from NuGet, install the package, and then all of your old code will continue to work. And then you'll see inside those proxies the new agents with the new methods appear. And then you could just start working with them there. But yeah, we're only showing this to you to show you how we maintain compatibility. You can have multiple, these are checkboxes, they're not radio buttons, so you can have multiple versions for the same application and sort of migrate your application slowly if you want, if you have different modules associated with it.
And standard apps may have granted extra licenses, like if you're making an ERP sync, you will need the integration server to make the ERP sync panel available in admin. This is what you also get with the Expander services, but we give it to you if it's a standard app. And then also, database mirroring requires that you have this license subscription on your tenant. And there are some restricted agents which we do not easily give out access to, and some we never give out access to.
Right.
And the user is only currently SuperOffice apps. No other partner app in any partner will get access to it. And the ERP sync is for all that they are making syncs. Ticket is coming. We go up webhooks. Replication.
Just a quick highlight. When you, on the form that you fill in to create an application and you say, okay, my application is going to require that server-to-server communication capability, and therefore I want to use a system user, then we just select the system user token. That's where that gets selected from. And then that basically ensures if that checkbox checked, then in the claims that we send back to you, it will include that system user token that you can then exchange for a system user ticket. Sorry?
And the app may also have different integrations.
Yeah. If we just, before we go there, just
you don't
the
have
last.
much time, Tony.
Oh, sorry. Yep, just at the bottom. It'll be really quick. With the restricted endpoints, we don't expect your application to be able to manage the users because there may be other integrations associated with that application that if your application starts provisioning users and roles and managing those sort of things, you might muck up other things, and we don't want you to do that. There's also other things that we're working on. I didn't get a chance to show it yesterday, but this specification out there called SCIM. It's the simple cross-domain identity management specification that is associated with OAuth and basically at that higher level layer. One of the most common requests we get is for be able to work with other identity providers like Auth0 as well as Orkta, in addition to Active Directory, Office 365, and Google. So what this specification allows is basically working with user provisioning, so that when you create new users or provision new users inside one enterprise, that identity provider will also replicate that information throughout the whole system. And SuperOffice can then automatically receive those new users so that you won't have to go and recreate them, which is a pain today. So those are things that are currently being researched and worked on, and also one of the reasons why we don't allow people to manage users.
And moving on. Integrations. That's only one URL per app. It means you could have data mirroring to one services URL and ERP sync to one services URL, or code connect to one services URL. And the customer state change is that we could say that this tenant is currently in termination, so you could get the information about that too. Then moving along. Any questions? Let's look us up later. Yeah. App authorization, this is what we mean. It's the customer administrator that has to click I approve here, and it stores information and gives them access. It means that all apps have app ID and app token, and it may have system user tokens, which is the private public. And it will have an app authorization showing who did it, as I showed you before. And then if it has system user token, there's a specific token for each tenant. And this may be exchanged for the system user ticket, and you get access behind the scenes and server to server. So one app, that being either custom or standard, may have access to one or several tenants, depending on the authorization level we give it. So, getting users on board. If this is a custom app, then it's okay that you have a setup that requires the users to go in and add user-defined fields and the extra list and all this stuff. But if this is something that you're going to publish in the App Store, you want to make this a bit easier. And you don't have to serve them champagne, but you should at least serve it on a silver plate so they don't have to do all the manual labor for them. So, eye on the target, what are you going to do? The security audit is for standard apps, all apps. It comes in 3 different packages depending on what you do to the database. If you're just reading, it's a small package. If you're reading and writing, it's a big and now medium package. And if it's also have like your own login or database mirroring, then it's a large package. The prices are on our pages. The result of the audit is strictly between you and Watchcom. You will get a report from them, and if there are anything we call red flags, you have to fix it, and they will tell us this app now has red flags, and we freeze it in stage until Watchcom comes back to us and say this one is now good to go, which is when you move on to production. Yeah, you will find the examples on GitHub, as Tony also mentioned yesterday.
And just really quickly, these examples are based on the old federated login, and they will be updated shortly to support OpenID Connect in all of them.
This is the very informative URL you will get, error message you will get if the URL you are redirecting to is not whitelisted. Then you just contact me or Tony. We have access to see who is actually trying to use this app ID and what redirect URL that they are trying to move forward to. And it says denied, and we could just say that do you want this actually to be approved? And we will whitelist it, or is this just a big mistake? Don't have time. But we do use Application Insight. We do see everything you do. I do use it to see what you're doing. There are if you're doing a lot of database operations, you need to limit it. The throttling is coming, but I have seen apps that have actually sent in so many database operations per second that it completely drowned the tenant. You don't want that to happen in production. So limited, I think we said 5 database operations per second is the max number. Throttling is coming. And then when you approve the app, it will automatically log in if you're logged in. With Super ID, you know the new login, you will stay logged in for at least 30 days. So if you want to just force the user to log out and re-log in before they approve the app. Just force a logout like this.
Okay. If you need to update a lot of data, is it possible then to buy more records a second or the place for that?
I don't think it's ready yet, but it's on the drawing. Marketing experts, you have to speak faster.
Yeah, that's pretty okay, because I think most people here are mainly interested in the development part. But just briefly, obviously you've created your app, it works, it's been audited, it's been tested, and now you want to get to the publishing. So that means that you have to, or somebody in your company needs to provide us with the app entry description. What does it do? What is the benefits? Give us good images, videos, customer testimonials, if you have any, or as soon as you do. You need recognizable app icons and mainly create a good user experience. What happens if I click on install? What are the steps? What do I sign up to? Can I understand what I'm getting into as a customer? And it sounds obvious, but it's one of those things that we actually do spend a bit of time on, often for the first time when a new partner gets on board first time, because it's a matter of putting yourself in the customer's shoes and walking through their total experience. And this is one of the things that we obviously do provide a lot of discussions and help, but it is your business. So you kind of have to go through this. We have a form, of course, another form, that we collect the information from you and then we enter into sort and then we discuss it and change it together with you.
And this is where we have Miriam. Miriam, if you could stand up and maybe she will have questions. She's the one helping you with the App Store entry.
Yes, we also try to give some guidelines, and again, this is available on the community, and we're adding things to this. But I will say that I do notice that I understand that not necessarily a lot of you have a lot of marketing people on board, but we try what we can do to help. But it's really, really important that you also invest into this to make it sellable. Because once you build it, you still need to promote it, and it's something that we do. Obviously, we try to promote the App Store in general, the themes, and the individual apps through various means, such as we're now finally getting a link inside SuperOffice, the user interface for customers, that lets them click and go straight into the App Store, and it kind of increases the awareness of the App Store itself. We also try to write some inspiration articles for our community, push some of these out to the newsletters and social media. I always encourage you or the commercial people in your company to create webinar materials and things like that, or participate in events to basically get in front of the customer. Because you need to do that too, and you also need, this is a joint thing. We're not selling apps on behalf of partners, we're promoting them, and so are you. So it's really important that you also do the work in terms of making sure that your partners and your employees are up to speed with what you do and what you can offer, and work with us basically. And it's ongoing, it doesn't stop, but there's always like you do a launch and then you have to keep it going. So it's and this is where all of you have to help, even if you're developing. I'm sure you have LinkedIn, and you may be able to share and be able to push your own products out, helping your salespeople to get more awareness through your networks. This is a constant new world of promoting and talking and getting exposure. Next one. Yeah, actually that's the conclusion of this part and this session. I think there's mainly technical things that we wanted to share, but if you have any questions in addition to me, then obviously catch me.
Does the app, when I have an app in the App Store, does it have to go to the whole approval process again when I push an update? on it?
No. But if you do...
What was the question?
I'll repeat the question. It's if I have an app in the App Store, they have to reapprove it when I do an update. As long as you're just doing normal updates, then there's no problem.
What's
If
normal
however,
about that?
no, you bug fixes, add new minor features. But if you do make changes, like now I will use system user, do behind the scenes operation instead of just user changes. I will add the database mirroring or quote sync endpoint to my app. Then it needs to go through watchcom again.
Add capabilities to the application. If you're just using our proxies or generate your own proxies and make a request through the agents, these are sort of some of the things that we see. We know what your application is, we get a description of it, and then we can sort of map that out. Do you have a quick way to show application insights? So I want to sort of show you just how deep it is that we can go into and see the background of every single process, every single request that your application sends into us. We're tracking it, we're graphing it, we're monitoring it. So we do this across the board. And then we know what your application is doing. And let's say you're using only the person agent and the contacts agent for like the first 6 months, but all of a sudden we see spikes in project agent, other agents that we have available. Then we'll sort of say, okay, these are sort of new features and functionality. If you're using our proxies, we're not going to think too much about it. We know who you are, what your application is doing. We know that our proxies don't try and manipulate any of the information. They're predictable. But if you start doing some things that are unpredictable, then we're going to kind of detect those things, and it'll raise some flags and awareness notifications to us, and then we just sort of follow it up. We don't do like inquisitions or anything like that, but it's just basically a little bit of...
Don't?
No. I'm optimistic. But, you know, and then the major features that she was talking about are things like, well, if you want to add in ERP synchronization, or if you want to add in database mirroring, if you're going to add in quotes, any of the extra things that are not part of the normal agents, when we start calling out to you, and of course we want to make sure that you're validating all of the requests, because validation is important. There's the man-in-the-middle attacks that we need to protect ourselves against, that you need to protect yourselves against. And when we do those certifications with audits with Watchcom, they're doing these things on our behalf, and they're helping you along the way and showing you and giving you great insight on how you can make your applications rock solid and stable and not susceptible to attack.
Did many of you go to Dr. Song's presentation inside Tony's yesterday? I do love this name, Dr. Song. This is what he was actually doing during the presentation yesterday. It's kind of small, but it's like...
You can see that he's accessing the script agent. He's over here. He was calling get apps by unique identifier, getting some archive lists, executing the script, and that's how we were seeing, his queries coming out and getting users by name, scripts by name, and then he was executing the scripts and then getting contacts for customers by name, and then he switched it by email address. And then we can see that, and then you can drill down into these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you see which tenant you're doing a lot of operations on, when you're doing them? And we see this in all environments. And in SOD there are many who have a really small database. So it's important that you remember that you need to, when you search, that you have page sizing. You don't want to ask for everything, because when you come into a production database and you ask for all contacts, you may be getting back.
Right, that's what the paging info is there for. So use paging so that you aggregate the data accordingly. But also things like, there was the question about when you want to save a lot of data. Use the API intelligently. There is the import agent if you want to use things for contacts and persons. Projects not necessarily, but if you're going to be working with a lot of projects, just give us a heads up and let us know what you're going to be doing. There are other things. When you're searching for data, use the archive providers intelligently. when you want to do massive updates, but don't call in and get all contacts and go through the contact agent and get the entire contact entity and work with it. Use bulk update. Bulk update is a very smart way in order to update lots of information in one go. It's a small request that in the background processing can be pretty massive. So that's using the API intelligently. If you're not sure and you want a little bit of help with it, by all means, submit an email to sdk@superoffice.com, and we'll try and help you optimize your application as much as possible.
Because the point of this, of course, is to keep our platform or our customers safe, secure, and that the performance work.
Any other questions? Great hands right here.
Yeah. Are there any versioning of the REST APIs like for the WCF services?
On the WCF services?
No, for the REST services, are there any versioning? Because I've experienced that for a custom app that I have made, that from one day to another, then something that was working one day suddenly was updated the next day. So, for example, if you had to send some kind of a data set in order to get an entity updated, then that data set has suddenly changed from one day to another. So I was missing some kind of versioning. So I was wondering if there was any, like if I was using services 75 in WCF services, then I know this is what there is.
Yeah. I have to look into that actually, because I know the web API depends on the SOAP services actually. If you didn't know, behind the scenes, all of those web API or REST queries get translated into our service API. So everything goes through our services API, whether you know it or not. It's sort of hijacked. So if you had checked for your application to use a specific services, I'm going to have to look, and I will get back to you on this, whether or not it uses the checked services for translation, or if it goes ahead and just always uses the latest.
Yeah, and that's my impression, that it does that. Yeah.
I think I'm pretty sure, I'm 95% confident that it always uses the latest, because if you go and look at, if you're on SOD and you're building applications and you're addressing the the customer ID, context identifier, tenant ID /API/v1, and you get a list of the on-demand documentation, you'll see it changes, and it's always the latest.
Yeah.
It's never static. So that's the latest and greatest. So I think it's always using the latest services API, and if something changes, well, that's probably why. And if you do see a big change like that, then please let us know. Send an email to sdk@superoffice.com or appdev@superoffice.com and give us a way to tell us what you did, what your code is, what your request looks like, what the data used to look like, give us an example, and then what it does look like so that we can reproduce the problem. That actually saves the most time. If you can give us enough context to reproduce the problem, that can save us days trying to guess at what it was you were trying to do.
Yeah.
We'll have to go back in analytics and analyze your queries like through application insights and try and piece together the puzzle.
Yeah.
But if you can piece that puzzle together ahead of time, that can save days.
Yeah, I think I actually had a conversation with Margrethe on it.
I think so too.
Email. It's a while back, but we have experienced it a couple of times, so I was just wondering if there was any way of setting a specific version.
Okay. There is no way that I'm aware that you can set the web API and the RESTful endpoints to a specific version.
Okay.
I believe that's always going to be the latest.
Yeah.
Another question over here?
It wouldn't be installed because too many people have SOD, what we are discussing, but it's on hold, it's a separate test environment. So not yet.
We have a seminar later this month, towards the end of the month, that's going to discuss a lot of these routines. So the research is actively being done in the best way to facilitate sort of splitting off a database and doing some work on it while you maintain. Basically, doing like you're going to branch off a specific tenant database, and then you want to merge that back in, or with all the changes that you do, provision that you do on that one database will then become the primary. Things like that. So there is active research being done on it. We're actually, Jens, if you know Jens, he's written a paper on it, and he'll be doing a presentation on it in the next week or so.
How do you partners, when a customer buys an app, how do they typically control billing, user licenses, things like that?
That's another good question. I think that varies depending on the systems you already have, and one of the things that we hope that, or we encourage you to actually talk to some of the other App Store partners who have apps inside their in the App Store, because I know they do it differently. There are available third-party systems